After Russia's October Revolution, the Eastern Front had gone quiet as Lenin's Bolshevik government exited the World War and began negotiating peace terms with the Central Powers. But those negotiations have failed, and now this week, the Eastern Front explodes back to life. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, Ukraine signed a peace treaty with the Central Powers, but it brought anything but peace. In fact, it caused Leon Trotsky to walk out of the Russian peace negotiations with the Central Powers and Germany to then decide to renew the war against Russia. There was new action in the field as well as the Ottomans advanced from Anatolia towards the Caucasus. Colonel Morel and his ragtag crew of Russians and Armenians retreated as they advanced. The retreat occupied 11 days between the 14th and 24th of February and was carried out with remarkable steadfastness and skill under bitter winter conditions. 40 to 50% of troops and refugees were frostbitten. The retreating columns, as in Ter Gukasov's epic withdrawal from the Elishkurt Valley half a century before, had to cover thousands of panic-stricken refugees against repeated attacks from the Dersim Kurds. The Ottoman 36th and 5th Caucasian Divisions followed the retreat and occupied Erzincan and Mama Hatun. By the 18th, the Ottomans were within 15 kilometers of Trabzon. But the main action this week was far to the north. The 18th was the end of the armistice between Germany and Russia, and the German army crossed the Dwina River, marching on Dvinsk and also towards Lutsk in Ukraine. These cities were occupied the following day as the whole line advanced, pushing into Estonia. The suddenly desperate Bolsheviks declared themselves ready to sign the unacceptable peace conditions dictated by the Central Powers at the Brest-Litovsk conference. But German General Max Hoffmann, the military rep at the conference, was in no hurry to accept their concessions. He now said the acceptance of conditions had to be sent in writing by courier through the German lines to Berlin. The German army advances towards Kiev, Moscow, Petrograd, and Reval with little resistance, occupying Minsk. German troops reach Finland to reinforce the White Guard. In fact, in 124 hours, they advanced 240 kilometers on the Eastern Front. Lenin and Trotsky's written letter reached Berlin the 21st, but it was rejected, and the Germans wrote back demanding even harsher terms than at the conference. They were well aware that Russia's territorial integrity was disintegrating rapidly. Lenin had been advised the whole time that his army could neither stop the Germans nor defend Petrograd. He had, though, been a bit more grounded in reality than some of his comrades. Last month, he had made very clear that it was a mistake to bet the survival of the Russian Revolution on the possibility of one happening now in Germany, which he thought inevitable, though not imminent. He thought hoping for such a revolution to save the day was a romantic dream and would lead to Russia's defeat. Still, most of the Bolshevik leaders preferred resistance to accepting terrible peace terms. Last month, 32 voted for a revolutionary war and just 15 for a separate peace. 16 supported Trotsky's no war, no peace plan we saw last week, figuring they'd lose more Baltic territory, but that was a price worth paying. It wasn't until after the massive German advance this week that Lenin could actually get a majority for a separate peace. But it wasn't just the East the Germans were focusing on. Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff and his staff were also making plans for a gigantic spring offensive in the West. The formal decision that it would be Operation Michael was finally issued February 8th. The basic plan had been issued last month, and the operation had to be ready to go around March 20th. The 17th Army would conduct Michael I, the 2nd Army Michael II, and the 18th Army Michael III. Number 1 was planned as an attack from the Cambrai front towards Boulicourt-Bapaume. Number 2, an attack towards Péronne and then north. These would cut off the enemy in the Cambrai salient, and then continue northwest and roll up the British. Michael III was to be an attack on both sides of Saint-Quentin to throw the enemy back over the Kozak Canal and then cover Michael II's flank. That was last month's plan anyhow, but there were other side plans still in the works. For example, Mars would be launched south of the river Scarpe a few days after Michael began. Thing is, last week at the big German Bad Homburg conference, Ludendorff said something that seemed to betray his belief that this would win the war for Germany. We must not believe that this offensive will be like those in Galicia or Italy. It will be an immense struggle that will begin at one point, continue at another, and take a long time. But the plans were still evolving. The day after that conference, the 17th Army was told the main effort of Michael I was on the pivot of the right wing against Arras, and not on the left wing cutting off Cambrai and linking with Michael II. 2 days later, this was overruled, and the main attack had to be on the left wing, and the execution of Mars depends solely on the success of the Michael attacks. Another meeting is scheduled for next week at Charleville. However the offensive begins, though, Ludendorff will be facing an army run by a different high command than before. After a month of political maneuvering to get rid of him, British Army Chief of Staff Wally Robertson resigned this week, rather than compromise on actions that he felt would weaken the British Army. On February 16, 1918 then, Sir Henry Wilson became the new Chief of the General Staff, and Sir Henry Rawlinson became the military rep at the Allied Supreme War Council at Versailles. Here's a quote from the great war generals on the Western Front. Robertson refused to accept the position at Versailles, for he felt the real power would rest with Wilson in London. Since Wally Robertson lacked the latter's talent for mischief, Wilson's own term for his relentless drive for self-advancement and backstairs maneuvering, he was probably correct. Robertson was, still is, the only soldier in the British Army to rise from the rank of private all the way up to Field Marshal. He began his military career in the Queen's Lancers in 1877 at the age of 17, lying and saying he was 18, and passed his officer's commission in 1888. The British Army was actually advancing in the field this week, though far from the Western Front, in Palestine. On the 19th, they were within 12 kilometers of Jericho, which they took the 21st. Now, they were now established on a line that threatened the Hejaz Railway. General Edmund Allenby had reached the northern end of the Dead Sea, the lowest part of the Earth's land surface, 1,290 feet below sea level. The Ottomans retreated beyond the River Jordan. The capture of Jericho not only gave Allenby access to the river, but also made possible another plan of his. Let me backtrack. Following the capture of Jerusalem in December, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George had convinced the Allied Supreme War Council that the British should launch a new offensive against the Ottomans in 1918. He then sent Jan Smuts from the War Cabinet to Egypt to determine if that offensive should come in Palestine or Mesopotamia. So now, while Smuts is touring Palestine, the fall of Jericho happens, and Smuts endorses Palestine. Allenby said last month that he would like to destroy 10 to 15 miles of the Ottoman Hejaz Railway, which was a major Ottoman supply route, and some of its bridges, and be in direct touch with the Arab revolt under Faisal, and then he would accomplish a lot. More and more, Allenby's plans now, after Jericho, involve a drive on Amman. And earlier, I mentioned the Germans reinforcing the Finnish White Guard. Their leader, General Mannerheim, was gathering his army in the north because by the 18th, South Finland was in Bolshevik hands. Mannerheim demanded the evacuation of all Russian troops, red or white, from Finland immediately on the 23rd. The Bolsheviks will agree to this, since they've got much bigger headaches of their own. And the week ends with the Ottomans advancing in Anatolia, the British advancing in Palestine, and the Germans advancing all along the Eastern Front. You gotta ask yourself, how did the Russians not see this coming? Well, hindsight is easy, but still, a majority of the Bolshevik leadership believed until this week that either revolution would cripple Germany or that Germany would accept no war, no peace. I suppose that optimism stemmed from the success of their own revolution and rise to power, but Russia is now in big trouble. Will they accept German peace terms? Will they try to fight? Will they submit and then launch a resistance? Will the Bolshevik government survive? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. If you want to learn more about one of the driving forces behind the German strategy throughout the war, you can click right here for our episode about Paul von Hindenburg. Our Patreon supporter of the week is the Dead Baron. Yep, the Dead Baron. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.